I used to believe that being steady was a strength. That if you kept your voice calm, your head down, and your work polished, people would respect you. That the people closest to you would see that quiet effort and hold it close. I was wrong. That evening, I stood at the kitchen counter stirring leftover soup on the stove. The kind of meal you make without thinking. The kind that says, I'm still trying even when no one asks you to. Ethan's phone lit up across the table. Just once, then nothing. I wasn't snooping. Just glancing. Just noticing. Vanessa, hello. The name glowed for half a second, then vanished. No second ring, no text follow-up, just that name floating like something half-swallowed. My boss. Someone who hadn't looked me in the eye since the last team meeting. Someone who once said visibility is earned when I asked why my name wasn't on the project summary. His phone buzzed again. Voicemail. I didn't mean to tap it, but my thumb moved anyway. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of something older. Her voice came soft, controlled. The kind of voice women learn to use when they've sat in enough boardrooms. She said, "Hey, I know you're probably home, yeah. Let's keep the usual time." That was it. 6 seconds. But I heard everything I wasn't supposed to hear. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like they'd done this before. Like she knew where he was. Like she knew he wasn't with me. And maybe that was what hurt more than anything. Not the betrayal, but the comfort in it. Like I'd already been erased long before I noticed. I didn't say anything that night. When Ethan came through the door, his arms full of takeout and his lips already forming a sentence, I met him with a smile so well practiced it didn't crack. He kissed my cheek like always, quick light, already moving past me. Sorry, I'm late. Got caught up at the co-op. They were doing some stupid wine tasting thing by the register. He laughed. I nodded. He handed me a container of pasta I didn't ask for. Set out 2 mismatched plates, poured tap water in chipped glasses like it was muscle memory. We sat in the soft light of our kitchen. Outside, Seattle mist slid down the window panes like slow tears. Inside, I stirred the food slowly, watching his hands more than his face. He talked. About some logo he was working on. About how the client was picky, but Vanessa said it might be part of a bigger campaign. Vanessa said. I kept chewing. And I wondered, when did her voice become a part of our dinner table? When did mine stop mattering? He asked if I needed help clearing up. I said I was good. He said he might work a bit more before bed. I said, of course. When he left the room, I didn't cry. I opened the dishwasher, loaded his plate, wiped the counter. And then I stood there, fingers pressed against the marble heart like a still drum. Some betrayals don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive with normal, with leftovers, with too much silence in the space between sentences. I went to bed with the voicemail still echoing in my ears. Not the words. The tone. That soft practice tone women use when they already know they're winning. The next morning, I stood in front of my closet a little longer than usual. I picked the navy blouse. The one Vanessa once said made me look serious in the right way. Then I put it back. Not today. Instead, I chose the soft gray sweater Ethan liked, the one he said made me look like home. I didn't know who I was dressing for anymore. By the time I got to the office, the rain had dried to a mist. The kind Seattle keeps like a secret. The elevator was crowded, quiet. A few people nodded at me. No one made space. On my floor, Vanessa was already there, heels off, walking barefoot across the carpet like she owned the weather. She smiled when she saw me. Bright, effortless. Delaney, she said, morale survey results came in. I flagged a few slides for your eye. You always catch tone shifts better than anyone. Tone shifts. I nodded. Sure, Send them over. She leaned closer than she needed to. Thank you, she said, voice low, almost warm. I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. But I felt something crack behind my ribs. Later in the break room, I overheard one of the junior designers talking about a new freelance hire on the brand refresh project. Yeah, Vanessa brought him in. Said he had a clean look she liked. Worked with him before on some side stuff. Clean look. Side stuff. I stirred powdered creamer into my coffee like I hadn't just had the air knocked out of me. I didn't ask for names. I didn't need to. Back at my desk, I pulled up the Slack channel for brand refresh. And there it was. Ethan Brooks, invited by Vanessa Lowe. No message. No introduction. Just there. Like he'd always been part of it. Like I was the one who'd arrived late. That night, I didn't ask Ethan how his day went. He didn't ask about mine either. We ate dinner takeout again, sitting side by side on the couch, a show playing in the background that neither of us was really watching. He laughed once. I think it was something the actor said. I didn't hear it. What I heard, still echoing low and steady inside me, was Vanessa's voice. Not just from the voicemail, from every meeting, every passing comment. Every time she introduced me as her go-to and then turned to someone else for credit. I started to wonder how long this had been unfolding. Not just the messages, not just the looks. The replacement. It doesn't always happen with a fight or a slam of the door. Sometimes it happens with nods, with withheld praise. With the slow shifting of attention, task by task, name by name. And you tell yourself it's okay. You're seasoned. You don't need to be seen all the time. You tell yourself loyalty still matters. That consistency will eventually get rewarded. But sometimes, you're just the last to know you've been left behind. I sat up after Ethan had gone to bed. The house was quiet. The dishwasher hummed like background noise in someone else's life. I opened my laptop, pulled up the retreat presentation files, scrolled through the folder tree until I found the internal morale survey she'd flagged. Clicked it open. There in the metadata was the name of the last editor, Ethan Brooks. Thema stumped. 2 days before she ever sent it to me. I closed the laptop slowly. Not with anger. With clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't come like lightning. It comes like a slow sunrise, and once it's there, you can't pretend you didn't see it. I turned off the lights. Stood in the dark a moment longer, and whispered the one thing I hadn't said in weeks. I see it now. Monday started like it always did, Seattle gray and a little too quiet. I got to the office early like I always had. Swiped my badge. Walked past the framed mission statements and the fake ficus no one watered anymore. The floor still smelled faintly like toner and someone's leftover granola bar. I logged into Slack, half thinking about a deck I needed to clean up before our project meeting. That's when I saw it. Campaign Q3 rollout. Final assignments. I clicked it, expecting my name under lead. After all, I'd owned the project since kickoff. I'd onboarded the team, built the structure, polished every metric. But the screen said otherwise. Lead Trina M, asterisk, asterisk, support Ethan B, asterisk, asterisk. E blinked. No mention of me. Not even advisor. I scrolled back through the thread, hoping I'd miss something. A footnote. A reshuffle. A last-minute change someone forgot to flag. Nothing. Just Trina's name, young, eager, maybe even talented, but barely 6 months in. I stared at it, letting the silence wrap around me. No one had said anything. Not Vanessa, not HR, not even Ethan. My heart beat slow, deliberate, like it was giving me time to understand what was happening. And still I kept refreshing like the truth might disappear if I looked at it long enough. Then a ping. Excited to lead this one. Thanks for the opportunity, Vanessa, Trina. The emoji at the end felt like a punch. I muted the thread. Saturday back in my chair. And told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Not because I wanted the credit, but because I wasn't even told I no longer had it. I left my desk under the pretense of needing more paper for the printer. The truth was I needed a moment to breathe. As I passed the HR wing, I caught a glance through the glass wall. Emma, the assistant, was reviewing files. One folder sat open on her desk and my name was on the tab. I didn't stop walking. Just slowed my pace. There was a yellow sticky note on the corner of my file. I could only make out a few words. Asterisk, asterisk. No movement this quarter. Asterisk, asterisk. That phrase used to be harmless. It meant asterisk. Hang tight, next cycle's yours. Asterisk. But in that moment, it didn't feel like a pause, it felt like a period. I kept walking until I reached the break room. The coffee was burnt. The creamer was gone. I poured half a cup anyway. Back at my desk, there was an envelope propped up against my keyboard. White. Neat. My name in blue ink. Inside was a birthday card. Happy birthday, Delaney. The signatures spilled across the inside, smiley faces, exclamation points. A few kind notes, asterisk. Thanks for always being a rock, asterisk and asterisk. So lucky to learn from you, asterisk. But one name was missing. Vanessa. No sharp pen strokes. No bold fa. Not even her initials. And I knew this wasn't forgetfulness. This was calculated. She wanted me to notice. And I did. I placed the card upright next to my monitor like I always had. Smiled when people walked by. Even laughed when Trina called out. We left a cupcake for you in the fridge. I thanked her. Then turned back to my screen, blinking slow and steady like that might hold back the ache. Funny how easy it is to become invisible even while everyone's still looking right at you. That afternoon, I got a calendar invite. Asterisk, asterisk. Strategy alignment. Vanessa, Trina, Ethan, 3:00 p.m., Conference B, asterisk. Asterisk. I wasn't on it. But I was copied in the prep notes. Strange how you can be included without being wanted. I clicked the link anyway. Watched the slides scroll by in real time. They were discussing campaigns I'd built. Charts I'd designed, copy I'd revised at midnight twice. And there they were adding comments, assigning tasks, reshaping timelines. Not one message. Not one question to me. It was like someone moved into your house and changed the furniture, but still used your teacups. Around 4 the door to Conference B opened. They filed out like nothing was wrong. Vanessa passed by my desk and said, "Oh, didn't see you were still here." Smile warm. Eyes blank. I forced a nod. Just catching up. She tapped the edge of my desk. You've been such a cornerstone, Delaney. Don't think I don't see that. Then she walked away. Cornerstone. Funny word. Something sturdy, unmoving, mostly hidden but still holding weight. Something you build around. Or something you bury. I packed up a little earlier than usual. At the elevator, I waited beside Trina. She looked up from her phone and smiled. Big shoes to fill, she said. You make this look easy. I didn't correct her. Didn't say I was still wearing those shoes. Just nodded. Thanks. That means a lot. We rode down in silence, the elevator humming like it was tired of everyone pretending. That evening, I drove home in silence. No music. No radio. Just the faint rattle of my keychain tapping the center console. Evan was on the porch when I pulled in. He had a bottle of Pinot open, one of the nicer ones I'd been saving for our anniversary. 2 glasses. One already half full. I didn't ask why. Didn't ask who the second glass was meant for before I showed up. He handed it to me like nothing was wrong. Like I hadn't just been erased from a life I spent years building. "Rough day?" he asked. I looked at him, at the man who once promised he'd back me through every fire. He didn't flinch. I took the glass. Sipped slow. It was my birthday. A quiet, rainy afternoon in early November. The kind of drizzle that blurred the windows just enough to make everything look softer than it really was. I came home later than usual, my shoulders damp from walking too long in the cold. The scent hit me before I even took off my coat, vanilla warm butter chocolate. Familiar, comforting, almost like childhood. Tessa was in the kitchen, hair tied up, flour dusted across one cheek, her apron crooked and streaked with frosting. She turned around and smiled genuinely. "I thought you'd be home later," she said softly. Then for the first time in years, she added, ****. Happy birthday, Delaney. Happy birthday, sis, ****. That word. Sis. ****. It came out quieter than the rest, but it landed louder than anything I'd heard in a long time. She used to call me that all the time when we were younger, when she was still just a girl whose shoes I tied and whose hair I braided before school. But somewhere along the way it faded. We became 2 adults, not sisters. 2 women in the same house. And that word disappeared. Until that day. I stepped forward slowly. On the table sat a homemade chocolate cake, 2 lopsided layers, frosting uneven, but there was effort in every curve. And in the center, carefully piped in pink icing, were the words ****. For the sister who raised me. ****. My throat tightened. She shrugged like she wasn't sure if she had gone too far. "I know I'm not great at this stuff," she mumbled, "but I don't know what I'd do without you. I really don't." I touched her shoulder gently. "You won't have to. You never did." We sat at the kitchen table and ate that cake together, just the 2 of us. No guests, no candles. Just the sound of forks clinking, the rain tapping the windows, and something almost like forgiveness hanging in the air. Tessa told me about a styling client she was hoping to land, some woman in Newport with money and a taste for curated minimalism. She sounded hopeful, nervous. "Are you going?" I asked. "Just for a few days." I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. I looked at her. Really looked. The girl I raised, now a woman chasing her own version of freedom. She still had a smudge of flour on her cheek. I almost reached out to wipe it off, or maybe to pull her into a hug. Maybe if I had, something would have stayed different. But I didn't. I washed the plates. I cleaned the counter. I said thanks for the cake. "It's good, really." Tessa grinned, all proud. "I knew you'd say that." And that was it. That was the last time she called me sis and meant it. Not out of habit, not out of obligation, but from a place of love. A few weeks later, the distance began. Late nights. Short replies. Excuses that came too easily from lips that used to spill everything. And then came the unraveling. Looking back, I didn't just lose a husband. I lost the one person who had lived inside my heart for decades. ****. My sister, the girl I tucked in every night, the woman I once promised I'd protect no matter what. Turns out I never imagined I'd need to be protected from her. "The usual," I said. "People forgetting how things got done." He chuckled. "Corporate amnesia. Dangerous stuff." I didn't laugh. He went inside to finish a painting he'd left halfway on the easel. And I sat there on the porch watching the sun lower behind our neighbor's dogwood tree. Funny. No one had fired me. No one had said, "We don't need you anymore." But somehow everyone had moved on from me. Quietly, politely, as if I'd agreed to disappear. I traced the rim of the glass with my finger. This house. This job, this version of my life. I had built it all like a woman builds her reputation, quietly, carefully, one favor one night, staying late one skipped vacation at a time. And now it was being passed around like a dish at a potluck with no one asking who brought it. I didn't cry. Just sat there long enough for the wine to turn warm in my hand. Then I stood, went inside, and opened my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I knew I needed to look. I hadn't meant to snoop. It started with a misplaced charger. Evan was out for a walk or so, he said. I needed to plug in my tablet. His was in the second drawer of his studio desk. It always had been. But when I opened the drawer, the charger wasn't there. Instead, I found a card. Not just any card. A thank you card. Lavender envelope. Gold foil trim. The kind of stationery I used to keep for birthdays and dinner parties. It was addressed to asterisk. T asterisk. The handwriting wasn't Evan's. Inside, thank you for letting me stay while I figured things out. You saved me. I'll never forget that. T. New date, new return address. I stood there still holding the card while the dog barked in the distance. Stay while I figured things out. Who had been staying? And when? I replaced the envelope carefully even though my hands were shaking. Closed the drawer, locked the studio door behind me. That night at dinner, Evan asked if I'd want to visit Tessa next weekend. Tessa, I echoed too sharp. He raised an eyebrow. She's been meaning to show us her new loft, said she redecorated. I sipped my soup. She redecorated fast, thought she just moved in. She had help, he shrugged. That artist she's seeing now. I didn't ask more, but something in his voice felt off, like he was trying not to say too much. And suddenly, the initials on that card didn't feel random. They felt planted. The next day I stopped by the florist on Hawthorne. They'd just gotten in fresh hydrangeas and I thought a few stems might lift the room. White or blue? The owner asked. White, I said. Always white. At home, I trimmed the stems, filled the ceramic pitcher Evan made years ago, and placed them on the windowsill in the kitchen. They didn't change anything. But sometimes women like me, we fix the small things when we're afraid the big things are already too far gone. That afternoon, Tessa called. Can I borrow your blue coat? She asked. The long one with the sash. I paused. That coat's in your closet. Oh, she said quickly. Right. Must have forgotten I left it there. My mind went back to last month. Tessa had stayed over a few nights after a rough breakup. Or so she said. I didn't ask for details then. But now the pieces started to feel wrong. The lavender card. The sudden interest in redecorating. The way Evan had been cleaning the guest room like it mattered. And that blue coat. It hadn't been in my closet for weeks. I stared at my phone still warm in my hand long after the call ended. Some people cheat with bodies. Some cheat with silence. Either way, the house fills with ghosts you're not allowed to name. That night I didn't touch the wine Evan poured. Just said I was tired and lay awake listening to the clink of his brush in the jar of turpentine. I used to love that sound. Now it just meant he was painting something I'd never be invited to see. I started paying attention. Not in the loud confrontational way, no screaming, no asking. Is there something you're not telling me? Number just watching. Evan's phone no longer lived on the kitchen counter. It traveled with him bedroom, bathroom, backyard. He used to leave it charging for hours unattended. Now he flinched when it buzzed. I noticed the towels. One was damp at 11 a.m., though neither of us had showered since the night before. The coffee tin was emptier than usual. A woman knows when another woman has touched her kitchen. We just do. One morning, I opened the pantry and found a jar of almond butter. Organic, crunchy, with a green label. I'd never bought that brand. Evan hated almonds. But Tessa used to make toast with that exact spread. She brought it to every trip we took. Said it reminded her of Paris. I stood there, jar in hand, my breath held too long. It wasn't a weapon, wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough. Enough to know the lines in my life were being redrawn behind closed doors. I didn't bring it up that night. Instead, I set the jar in the middle of the table. Didn't say a word. Evan noticed. His eyes lingered on it. But he didn't speak either. We sat through dinner with the almond butter watching us like a silent judge. Later, while he was upstairs, I checked his studio again. Not for drama. Just for proof that I hadn't imagined the gaps. The envelope was gone. The drawer now held only pencils and a sketchbook. I flipped through the pages. On one of them, charcoal rough strokes, a woman half-turned, hair tied in a low bun. Her profile wasn't mine, but I knew that nose. I'd fixed her makeup at least 20 times before she left the house. Tessa, drawn like a memory someone tried not to forget. I didn't confront him. Not after the sketch. Not after the almond butter. Not even when I found her perfume on a scarf hanging in the hall closet. Instead, I sat at the foot of our bed and stared at the wall. This was the same room where Evan once told me he loved the way I read in silence. He said my stillness calmed him. Now my stillness terrified me, because it meant I was seeing everything. I began keeping a journal. Not one of those leather-bound poetic ones. Just a cheap spiral notebook I bought at the grocery store when I went out for milk. Page after page, I recorded time Evan left the house. What he said, what didn't make sense. I wasn't trying to build a case. I was trying to stay sane. One night, I walked into the kitchen and stopped short. Tessa's mug. It was white with a tiny chip at the handle. We bought it years ago at a flea market in Narragansett. It vanished sometime last winter. Now it sat on my kitchen counter full of lukewarm peppermint tea. Evan was nowhere in sight. I touched the mug. Still warm. I opened the back door. Cool air brushed my face. In the distance, I saw the faint glow of a phone screen, two silhouettes seated on the patio bench. Low voices. A giggle, a touch on the arm. And still I said nothing. I backed away. Closed the door softly. I couldn't even cry. I stood there clutching the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. Then I turned off the light and went upstairs. That night, I lay beside Evan like nothing had changed. But everything had. The next morning, I cleaned the house. Not out of habit. Not for comfort. But for control. I washed every dish. Wiped every doorknob. Reorganized the linen closet. I wanted to remind myself this house was mine. Every tile, every window pane, every damn rosemary bush outside. I planted those. I paid for those. When Tessa first moved in years ago, she cried and called me her anchor. She said I was the only one who'd never abandoned her. She was 25. Fragile. I gave her the guest room and said, "Stay as long as you need." She never left. I didn't notice when she started leaving her shoes by the front door. Didn't protest when she hung a second robe in the bathroom. Little things. Harmless at first. Then Evan started driving her to work. Then he started mentioning how Tessa always knows where the good music is. I laughed it off. We were family. Family supports each other. But now I saw it. They weren't just stealing glances, they were making themselves at home in my life. I opened the drawer beside the fridge where I kept the warranties and receipts. And beneath them I took out the document Evan never bothered to read. The deed. My name. Only mine. Every signature, every stamp, every cent of the down payment was mine. I stood there alone in the kitchen and felt a strange calm wash over me. They thought they could erase me while living under my roof. They didn't realize I could evict them with one phone call. But I wouldn't. Not yet. I didn't want to make a scene. I wanted the truth. Unfiltered. Undeniable. So I bought 2 small cameras. Discreet, motion-triggered. I placed one near the hallway lamp, another in the upstairs reading nook. Not because I wanted to spy, but because I needed to stop questioning my own sanity. I needed them to write the ending of this story with their own hands. I closed the closet, smoothed the rug, lit a lavender candle by the window. Then I waited. The next afternoon Evan left for his art supply run. Tessa stayed behind. She claimed she had a headache, needed a nap. By 2:17 p.m., the hallway camera caught her creeping into our bedroom. By 2:21, she pulled open my dresser drawer. She didn't take anything. Just stood there. Ran her hand across the silk lining. Touched my grandmother's brooch. Then, she laid on my side of the bed. Shoes off. Arms behind her head. Like she belonged there. I didn't cry. I just stared at the screen. Paused. Rewound. Played again. They weren't just cheating. They were rehearsing my erasure. But this wasn't the final act. Not yet. I copied the footage. Saved it in 3 places. Then I poured myself a glass of wine. Saturday at the table. Folded laundry. Looked at the sun setting behind the fence I built with my father 10 years ago. And I whispered aloud, not to Evan, not to Tessa, but to myself. You're not invisible, Delaney. You're just the storm they didn't see coming. The night before her birthday brunch, I stood alone in the hallway. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. No footsteps upstairs, no clinking dishes in the sink. Just the slow hum of the old fridge, the only thing that hadn't turned against me. I could hear them laughing earlier. Evan and Tessa. Downstairs going over the menu like this was their home to host from. She likes lemon ricotta pancakes, right? That was her voice. Too bright. Too casual. He grunted in agreement like he was doing me a favor by remembering. I didn't answer. I stayed in the study with the door half closed, pretending to read. It wasn't the betrayal that broke me. It was how easy it had become for them. How natural. Like I'd been moved aside, quietly, conveniently. Like they were already rewriting the script of this house, and I was just a forgotten line. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old camera. The one Evan gave me when we still dreamed together. Back when I'd shoot the shadows in our backyard just to see how light changed things. I charged the battery, wiped the lens, and started taking pictures, not of them, not yet, but of everything they touched. The mug, the bath towel she used, the wine glass she always left in the sink. It was my way of saying I see you. I see all of it. But more than that, it was a way to see myself. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was collecting, witnessing, preparing. And somehow doing that gave me back a piece of myself. The woman who noticed. The woman who chose stillness, not silence. I walked outside for air. The sky had just turned amber. And in the garden half dead from neglect, I saw something bloom. Lavender. The same patch I planted the year Tessa moved in. It had survived, even now. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to beg anyone to see me. Because soon, they would have no choice. The next morning I went out before anyone woke up. Main Street was quiet at that hour. Just a few joggers, the smell of roasted beans drifting from the corner cafe, and the wind catching my hair as I walked past old brick storefronts. I stepped into Bell's Antiques, a tiny shop I hadn't visited in years. Looking for something special, the woman asked, smiling from behind a counter of dusty glass. Yes, I said softly. A gift. For someone who thinks she's taken everything. The words surprised even me. But the woman didn't flinch. She pointed to a velvet box on a lower shelf. Inside was a delicate silver key pendant shaped like a miniature skeleton key. Almost fragile. She said, "It opens nothing," the shopkeeper whispered. But sometimes that's the point. I bought it. Not for Tessa to wear. Not for Evan to ask about. But to place carefully, intentionally on the bathroom counter where she left her lotions. A quiet message: you might feel safe here, but nothing is truly yours. Asterisk. When I got home, they were making breakfast. Together again. Tessa was in my robe. The pale blue one my mother had sewn for me when I got promoted. The belt tied wrong. The sleeves rolled like she didn't care it wasn't hers. Morning she chirped like we were in some sitcom. I didn't answer. I placed the antique box on the counter, walked past them, and made coffee. Evan looked up but said nothing. I caught his eyes for a second. Empty. Not guilt. Not shame. Just convenience. Like he was tired of hiding, and this casual takeover was easier. I took my mug outside and sat on the back steps, staring at the lavender bush again. It was blooming stronger now. And in that moment I realized. It wasn't just about catching them. It was about reminding myself I still had choices. Not to hurt, but to reclaim. They could play house all they wanted, but I still held the deed. And I had time. That afternoon I reviewed the footage. Not the dramatic kind, no slamming doors, no stolen kisses, just the slow, mundane rot of something once sacred. I had set up the old camera in the corner of the living room, angled toward the kitchen archway. I told myself it was to see what I already knew, but really it was to make it real. I watched her hum to herself while pouring wine. I watched him walk past her without a word, yet touch her waist like it was muscle memory. And then I saw the moment they paused. Not out of guilt, but out of comfort. They weren't hiding anymore. Not really. They had domesticated betrayal, turned it into routine. He handed her the grocery list I had written the night before. She laughed. He shrugged. Like I was some ghost whose handwriting they borrowed out of habit. I paused the video. My own handwriting. Looped. Precise. Still here. I suddenly remembered how long it took me to make this house feel like home. The chipped mug Evan kept because it matched the lake colors outside. The side table Tessa once called too old-fashioned before she decided it looked vintage enough to stay. They weren't building a life, they were squatting in mine. I sat back, let the silence soak in, and that's when I realized. This wasn't about keeping evidence anymore. It was about keeping clarity. So I started taking notes, not out of vengeance, but precision. Timestamps. Who said what? Where my things were when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Not to destroy them, but to remind myself I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak, and I was definitely not gone. I was here, watching, choosing. Every click, every note. A breadcrumb back to the woman they thought they'd erased. And if clarity was power, then I was getting stronger by the hour. That night I changed the Wi-Fi password. It was petty. And perfect. Evan was on the couch scrolling. Tessa was in the guest room, which used to be my reading room, trying to stream some show she'd probably claim was research for a project. I sat across the kitchen sipping peppermint tea. The same mug they never touched. Too plain for their taste. "Hey," Evan called. "Is the router acting up?" I looked up slowly. "Must be the weather," I said. It wasn't. He tapped the screen again. Frowned. Refreshed. Nothing. Tessa's voice rang out from down the hall. Fi's dead again." I didn't respond. I just opened my notebook and began to write a list. A real one this time. Not groceries. Not weekend errands. A list of things that were mine. The ceramic bowl my mother made in her first pottery class. The deed to the house. The backyard hammock I put up with my bare hands. My credit. My lavender. My name. Each item like a nail in the frame of a door I hadn't realized I could still walk through. They had my silence. But they never had me. I stood up, went to the bookshelf and pulled down the black file folder with the house paperwork. I placed it in my canvas bag, zipped it shut. Tomorrow I'd go see a lawyer. Not to file anything. Not yet. But to remind myself of the shape of boundaries. And the language of ownership. Delaney, Tessa called again. "You didn't change the Wi-Fi, did you?" I turned off the kitchen light. "Good night," I said. That was all. Let them sit in the dark. Let them wonder. In the silence of a home I built, I reclaimed something louder than confrontation. I reclaimed choice. Asterisk, asterisk. The parking lot was half empty when I pulled in. Early Monday, spring air still cold. I liked it that way. The lawyer's office was inside an old brick building that used to be a post office. Now it handled things far heavier than letters. I sat in the car for a moment, my fingers tracing the edge of the folder beside me. No tremble, no rush. Just breath, just clarity. Inside, the front desk clerk smiled politely. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I'd like to speak to someone about a property reassignment." She nodded. "Let me check who's available." 5 minutes later, I was in a small office with soft lighting and water bottles stacked like offerings in the corner. The lawyer's name was Carmen. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, but kind. "What can I help you with today?" she asked. I opened the folder. Slid out the house deed. "My name's on this," I said. "And I want to understand exactly what that means, legally, financially, and logistically." She scanned the document, then looked up. "Well, it means it's yours." She didn't say it in a dramatic way. Just as a fact. Like saying the sky was blue. Or lavender bloomed in May. Still hearing it out loud. It hit somewhere deep. Somewhere that had been starved for validation. I nodded slowly. "I want to sell it," I said. "Not tomorrow. Not rash. But soon. I need to know what steps to take and how to do it clean." Carmen leaned forward. "We can help with that. Do you want the current occupants notified legally?" I smiled. "Not yet," I said. "I'd like them to enjoy their illusions a bit longer." She blinked. Then chuckled once. Understood. I signed no papers that day. But I left with a list. A process. A timeline. More than that, I left with something else. Agency. Asterisk, asterisk. The kind of power no one grants you. You take it back step by step. The next morning, I stopped by the old cafe on Alder and 6th. It used to be a place for weekend catch-ups, birthday scones, anniversary brunches. Now it felt like neutral ground somewhere between memory and surrender. She was already there. Elaine. My mother-in-law. Evan's mother. She sat in the same corner booth she always liked by the window where she could watch people but not be watched. Her posture straighter than her age should have allowed her eyes scanning the room like she hadn't quite made peace with showing up. I slid into the seat across from her. Neither of us smiled. She stirred her tea slowly. "You look tired," she said. I nodded. "So do you." A pause. "I know," she said quietly, "that this isn't just about a house." I looked at her. It never was. She set the spoon down, perfectly aligned with the saucer. "I told Evan not to marry you," she continued, her voice brittle. "Said you were too still, too unreadable." I didn't flinch. I remembered those early years, how she'd made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. "But I was wrong," she added. "Stillness isn't weakness. It's where storms gather before they move." Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the napkin. That was new. She'd never shown nerves. "Do you know how I found out?" she asked. I shook my head. She sighed. "Tessa posted a photo. From the living room. Your hydrangeas were in the frame. I recognized them. Recognized the rug, the art, but not the way she captioned it." Her voice dropped. She called it, "their home." Asterisk. I didn't say anything. "You should have screamed," she said. "Thrown things, made a scene. I'm not built like that." She smiled faintly. You're built like a root. Invisible but holding everything in place." Then, after a pause, "If you leave that house, who's going to keep what's good in this family intact?" It took me a moment to answer. "Maybe it's not my job anymore." She blinked. There was no malice in her eyes. Only grief. Not for Evan. Not even for me. But for the idea of what she thought her son and her family had been. She pushed a folded paper bag across the table. Inside was a bundle of dried lavender. "From my old garden. I saved them before they cleared the flower beds," she said. "Didn't think it was right." I swallowed hard. Not because I needed her approval, but because for once she saw the cost. And didn't look away. We finished our tea mostly in silence. When we stood, she touched my sleeve lightly. "I know it's late," she said. "But I believe you were the better part of this story." I didn't cry. Didn't soften. Just nodded. And walked out into the cold. That afternoon I printed the final timeline. My name. My deadline. My move. Outside, the wind picked up as I walked to the car. My hair flew across my face, and for once I didn't fix it. Let the wind rearrange me. I was already becoming someone else. The house was quiet when I came home. Tessa's car wasn't in the driveway. Evan's tools were scattered in the garage exactly as he'd left them, messy, careless, temporary. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, letting the silence greet me like an old friend. A loyal one. The kind that doesn't lie. And, in that silence, I remembered the last time she called me sister like she meant it. I asked her to step outside. Just us. No audience. No noise. She followed, still holding her glass of orange juice. Wearing the bracelet I got her last Christmas. We stood on the porch. The wind was soft, my voice softer. Do you remember my birthday last year? Tessa blinked. The one with the carrot cake. I nodded. And the part where you called me your favorite person in the world. She let out a faint smile. I meant that. I set my glass down. Tessa, you slept with my husband. The smile vanished. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I know it wasn't a one-time mistake. It was ongoing. Repeated, with intent. She held her breath. You want to tell me why? I asked. Tessa's lips trembled. I didn't plan for it to happen, he just saw me. He made me feel like I mattered. I saw you, I said. She looked at me then, as if realizing too late that I had. But with you, she said, I was always the little sister. The one you helped. The one you carried. I never felt like I had anything that was just mine. So you took what was mine, I said. Not built. Took. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said flatly. And the worst part, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. Her eyes welled up. I am sorry, Delaney. I swear. I shook my head. Last year you looked me in the eye and said you didn't know how you'd survive without me. I paused. And all the while you had his messages saved in your phone. You lied straight through your teeth while calling me sister. Tessa's voice cracked. I was lost. You were selfish, I said. And now you want forgiveness without consequences. She went quiet. I just want to fix things, she whispered. You can't, I said. Because I'm not the same person you betrayed. She looked at me panicked. Are you going to tell everyone? I stood up straighter. I don't need to shout, I said. The truth doesn't need a microphone. It echoes. Her eyes filled with fear. I'm still your sister, she pleaded. I looked at her for a long moment. No, I said. You were. Then I turned and walked inside. Left her on the porch holding a drink she couldn't taste under a sky that didn't care. The scent of lavender still clung faintly to the air. My lavender. Dried bundles I'd hung in the mudroom long before Evan ever touched a rake. I didn't turn on the lights. Just walked room to room with the folders still in my hand like a quiet witness. The photos on the hallway wall were still there. Except one Evan and I in Santa Fe that year. He said, I want to make memories here. It was missing. I found it later. In the laundry basket under old towels. Cracked frame. Glass gone. I didn't put it back. Instead, I went into the kitchen and opened the junk drawer. I pulled out a set of keys. My keys then removed the spare I'd given Evan years ago. The one he never asked for, just assumed was his to keep. I slid it into a small velvet pouch and tucked it in the back of the drawer. Not dramatic. Just final. Upstairs, I walked past their closed door. Voices behind it muffled, laughing at something I no longer needed to understand. I stopped by the linen closet. Pulled out the quilt I had made before our first winter in this house, folded it carefully. Downstairs again, I paused in the living room. There on the coffee table, a half-finished wine bottle, 2 glasses, lipstick on one rim. Tessa's, no doubt. I didn't flinch. I just picked up my mug from the sink, my peppermint mug, and rinsed it clean. Let it dry upside down like always. Then I walked to the back porch. The lavender beds were overgrown, fading. Still some stems reached up to the sun unbothered. I crouched and cut one, held it for a moment. Breathed it in. This was my goodbye. Not to the house, but to the version of myself who thought staying silent would protect what mattered. I'd been protecting the wrong things. Now I was protecting me. The next morning I didn't make breakfast. No coffee. No toast. No lazy music humming from the old speaker Evan never learned to connect. I got dressed in jeans, a black turtleneck, and the boots I wore to refinance this house 6 years ago, back when he still called me the steady one. Steady can move mountains. Quietly. At the county clerk's office, the receptionist barely glanced up when I handed over the documents. Name on title Delaney Brooks, I said. Current mailing address, the same, but not for long. She nodded, stamped the page, and slid it back toward me. Done. That was the first move. I spent the rest of the day transferring utilities. Phone calls, verifications, all made from a cafe 2 blocks from the lake. While they were likely at home rearranging the furniture I'd picked. I didn't rage. I didn't run. I reclaimed. By 4 p.m., the email confirmation arrived, escrow held in my name. Buyer terms accepted. Close date 30 days. Just like that, the clock started ticking. That night I returned home late. Neither of them noticed. They were too wrapped up in a streaming show I used to love sitting on the couch I had saved up for. I walked upstairs without a word. Tessa looked up, blinked, but didn't speak. Maybe she could feel it too. The air had shifted. Later I heard them whispering behind the bedroom door. Not about love, not even guilt. About weekend plans. About maybe repainting the guest room. Let them dream. They didn't know they were planning inside a house that was already sold. They didn't see me behind the scenes turning every silent year into a signature, every ignored moment into a clause. Evan used to joke. You're the quiet one. Dangerous when pushed. He had no idea how true that would become. Dear Tessa. You'll never read this. That's not bitterness, it's a boundary. I'm writing this for the version of me that still wonders if you ever looked back. If you ever stood in the hallway and thought she really loved me. Because I did. Long before Evan. Long before lavender-scented candles and dinners we never ate together. You were my little sister. And I built my life around keeping you safe. I don't think you ever knew how many times I stood between you and something sharp. That birthday you forgot to RSVP, I covered for you. That internship you blew off, I begged the coordinator for a second chance. When Mom died and you fell apart, I didn't. Because someone had to make the calls, settle the bills, pack up her jewelry in tissue paper. You cried. I carried. And maybe that's where the imbalance started. You got used to me being the net that caught everything. And I got used to thinking that loving someone meant never dropping the rope, even if it burned my hands raw. But what you did, Tessa, what you both did, wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. You didn't just take my husband, you rewrote our story like I was never in it. You moved into my house, used my dishes, laughed in rooms that remembered my silence. And then you looked surprised when I didn't clap for your new beginning. I think the part that still aches is that you didn't even hesitate. You didn't flinch. Not when I stood in front of you with the papers. Not when you opened the notice. Not when you saw the lavender in my hands and still asked why. As if you didn't already know. But this letter, it's not to relive it. It's to release it. Because holding on to the version of you that existed in my heart, that younger you, the one who used to braid her hair in my bathroom mirror and call me her anchor, has become its own kind of grief. And I won't mourn someone who's still alive. Tessa, you were the only person I ever called home without needing a key. But now I choose myself. That sounds cliché, I know. You'd probably roll your eyes and call it a Pinterest quote. But it's truth. Real, rooted, lived in truth. I wake up in a smaller house now. One with no creaky stairs or shared calendars. But the silence here is mine. And I've stopped mistaking loneliness for peace. I still keep a bundle of dried lavender on the windowsill. Still make too much tea for one person. Still fold towels the way Mom taught us. But I no longer wait for your birthday call. Or your apology. Because forgiveness doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like not answering the door. I wish you kindness. I wish you clarity. And I hope someday when you're walking alone and the air smells like spring after rain, you'll think of me. Not with guilt, not even with regret. Just, truthfully, as the sister who once loved you enough to stay quiet. And who finally loved herself enough to speak. Delaney. I didn't need to throw things. Didn't need to scream. I just needed a notary and a deadline. And now both were on my side. The notice came on a Tuesday. Standard envelope. No warning, no emotion. Just paper. Tessa was the one who opened it. I was pruning the lavender out back the same way I had every fall since the house became mine. Delaney, she called, her voice thinner than usual. What is this? I didn't answer right away. I wiped my hands on my apron, walked slowly to the porch, met her eyes. She held up the paper like it might burn her fingers. Notice to vacate, she stammered. 30 days. I nodded. Escrow closes in 3 weeks. You'll need to pack. Evan stepped up behind her. His expression unreadable, just the way he liked it. You're selling the house, he said, like he'd just discovered gravity. No, I said softly. I've sold it. Tessa blinked. But this was our home too. No, I corrected, folding the garden shears calmly. This was my home. You were guests. Uninvited ones. The silence between us stretched wide. But I didn't fill it. Let them sit with it. Let them feel for once the weight of consequences. Evan tried to gather himself. Tessa's been trying. She's sorry. We didn't mean. I raised my hand. Don't finish that sentence. His jaw tensed. Old habits itching to fight to control. But he had nothing left to hold on to. Because I had taken the one thing they thought they could steal without resistance. Security. Asterisk, asterisk. Now it was them who had to figure out next steps. It was them who had to leave behind what they never earned. That evening, I sat on the porch alone. Watched the light change on the lavender fields. The wind was sharp, almost winter-like. But I felt no chill. Inside, I heard drawers opening, soft footsteps, quiet arguments. Packing. Disbelief. They still hadn't understood. I never raised my voice. Because I never needed to. Power doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it just signs a contract. And waits. They left on a Thursday morning. No goodbye. No apology. Just the sound of car doors closing and a U-Haul pulling away. I didn't stand by the window. I didn't wave. I didn't even glance out. Instead, I was in the kitchen making coffee. Same way I used to do before everything blurred, before betrayal had a face and a first name I once loved. The house felt still, but not empty. I walked through each room slowly that morning. Ran my hand along the mantle Evan once claimed was his touch. Noticed the absence of perfume that Tessa used to spray like a signature. Everything was quieter now. Clearer. I sat at the table, letting the mug warm my hands. Outside, the lavender swayed gently. The light coming in through the kitchen window touched the tile the way it used to when I first moved in. Back then, I had painted that corner yellow. A shade called soft ember. Because I wanted the house to feel alive. I had forgotten that. Somewhere between being the provider, the fixer, the keeper of peace, I had let the house become theirs in my mind. And now I had taken it back. Without shouting. Without begging. Just reclaiming. Reclaiming space. Voice, peace. There's a strange grief that comes with justice. It's not explosive. It doesn't parade. It sits next to you in the quiet, puts its hand on your shoulder, and whispers, "You did what you had to do. And it was enough." And for the first time in years, I believed that. I started small. A new mailbox. The old one still had Evan's name scratched on the side. I replaced it with a simple black one, no frills, no initials. Just mine. Then I bought new sheets. The kind I always wanted. Soft Egyptian cotton in a warm terracotta hue. Tessa used to insist on white. "It photographs better," she said. But this house wasn't for show anymore. It was for sleeping well. Breathing slow. Waking up without a pit in my chest. I repainted the guest room. Turned it into a reading nook. Hung up shelves, filled them with books I hadn't touched in years. Some still had my name written inside in the loopy handwriting I had before life got practical. Even started baking again. At first it felt awkward. Like trying to remember a song I used to hum as a girl. But muscle memory is funny. By the third batch my hands moved like they used to. Measuring by feel. Trusting the scent more than the timer. I made a batch of lavender shortbread. Shared it with Miriam, my neighbor across the street. She hugged me a little longer than usual. "You're glowing," she whispered. I didn't reply. But later, standing in the mirror with flowers still on my cheek, I understood what she meant. It wasn't the glow of revenge. It was the calm after a storm no one saw me survive. That night, I pulled out an old box from the attic. Inside were cards from my mom. She'd passed 6 years ago. But her words felt freshly folded. One read: "You don't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes the quiet ones change the room just by staying." I held that card in my lap for a long time. The ink slightly faded, but the truth sharp as ever. I didn't need noise to be heard. I just needed space. And now, I had it. About a week later, I found the envelope. Tucked behind the last drawer in Evan's old desk. Almost like he meant to forget it. Or maybe he wanted me to find it when it wouldn't break me anymore. It wasn't sealed, just folded neatly. My name, Delaney, written on the front in his all-caps block handwriting. For a moment, I didn't want to read it. But I did. Not out of curiosity. Not even out of forgiveness. Just closure. The letter was short. He said he never meant to hurt me. That he didn't know how to stop needing to be seen. He said he admired how strong I was, how steady I stayed, even when he didn't deserve it. Then he wrote, "I think I always knew you owned the house. But I didn't want to believe it because that would mean you had the power, and I didn't know how to live with a woman who didn't need me to breathe." I folded the letter slowly. Placed it in a drawer. Not to revisit. Just to know that even in his mess of decisions somewhere, he saw the truth. It didn't change what he did. But it let me move 1 inch further from the ache. "Dear Tessa, I don't know why I'm writing this. I won't send it. I won't leave it in some drawer where you might stumble upon it years later. I won't make you part of my healing again. But I need to say this, if only for myself. Do you remember my 35th birthday? You showed up early with lemon cake you made from scratch. You were wearing that ridiculous apron with flamingos. I teased you about it, and you said, if I didn't have you, I'd be lost. You're my only real home. I believed you. I held on to that. Because you were my little sister. My soft spot. My built-in best friend before the world taught me not everyone stays. I didn't just let you into my house. I let you into my life's quiet places, the parts I didn't show even Evan. And you made yourself comfortable. Until one day you forgot whose name was on the door. I don't care about the affair anymore. Not in the way people assume. I don't cry over it. I don't lie awake wondering what you saw in him. I know exactly what you saw. He was comfort. He was validation. He was the mirror you needed even if it was warped. What breaks me still is how you never looked back. Never once said, I know this hurts you, but I don't know how to undo it. You just walked through the fire like I wasn't burning right next to you. You could have told me the truth. You could have left instead of lingering. You could have been honest or, at the very least, humane, but you chose the quietest kind of cruelty. You pretended I wouldn't notice. You made it easy for people to believe I was overreacting. You smiled in the kitchen. You borrowed my sweaters. You used my name as if it still belonged to you. I need you to understand this. I would have given you almost anything. But you took the one thing I couldn't give, my trust. And now it's gone. You are not the villain of every story. But in mine, you wrote yourself into a chapter you had no right to narrate. I don't hate you. I wish I did. Hate is a boundary. It's clean. What I feel is messier. It's grief. It's looking at an old photo and not knowing whether to smile or tear it in half. You were my home once, but now I choose something else. I choose to build a life where love doesn't walk in unannounced, where loyalty means more than proximity, where forgiveness is earned, not assumed. You don't get to knock on this version of my life. Not anymore. I hope you find peace, Tessa. But not at my expense. Delaney. That night I wrote a letter too. But not to him. To myself. I sat at the kitchen table, same one I used to set for 3. Lit a candle, and wrote. You are not what they left behind. You are what kept it all standing. You don't need applause to matter. You are not less because you chose kindness first. I didn't cry, I thought I might. But instead I smiled. A small, tired smile. Because that letter, it felt more honest than anything I'd said to myself in years. The next morning I framed it. Hung it in the hallway right by the front door. So every time I walk out, I remember who I am. And every time I come home, I remember who I'm not anymore. The morning they left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt honest, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand its ground with quiet grace. In family, betrayal cuts deepest not because of who they are, but because of who we thought they'd always be. If you've ever had to choose peace over proximity, you know healing isn't loud, but it lasts. If this story stirred something and you feel free to share your thoughts, I'll be reading quietly like always.